Uh, we have Mr. Thomas Lee Travis. Please, Mr. Travis.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Tom Travis. I reside in Lower Puna. I served 30 years in the Navy as a Navy submariner. After that career, I worked for 15 years as a government servant, 12 years as a government servant, where I worked lessons learned for the chairman of the Joint Staff in the Department of Defense. I served as studies director. I give you that background mainly so that you understand, I hope that my comments are informed. One of the threats of the lava flow is that it restricts transportation to and from Puna Geothermal Venture and the surrounding community. The second threat is that it poses the danger of placing one of the two transmission lines from PGV out of order for a prolonged period of time. Both of these threats directly impact the validity of the emergency response for casualties at PGV. Threats from the lava flow pose similar challenges in a PGV upset as those faced by civil defense during the landfall of Tropical Storm Iselle. A thorough evaluation of lessons learned from Iselle should be done, followed by a thoughtful revision to both the PGV and county portion of emergency response planning. I strongly urge both the mayor and the county council to take strong action to address the issues outlined that I'm going to discuss below. First major problem is that the PGV emergency response plan incorrectly allows the plant to operate power when there is an unacceptable risk of losing electrical load. Essentially, when a plant loses power, relief valves have to lift, dumping geothermal fluid into the community. If everything works right, that release may not affect health, but if anything else goes wrong, it most definitely does affect and threaten the health of the community in the surrounding area. The second issue with the County
You have
of
30
Hawaii,
seconds.
The County of Hawaii emergency response to Tropical Storm Iselle placed residents in an unnecessary danger. Similar challenges face County of Hawaii with a lava flow. Issues identified but not effectively addressed include inadequate warning and alarm, inadequate staging of resources, inadequate options for evacuation, and inadequate practice and rehearsal. If the county has followed the concept of operations...
Please summarize, Mr. Travis.
In conclusion, over 100 people experienced health effects from the toxic release from PGV. The County of Hawaii needs to learn those lessons and be sure that we do not have another repeat as a consequence of the lava flow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Travis. Our next...
Will he stay here for, will you be here for the discussion, Mr. Travis?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next testifier,
One
Ms.
last
Harding.
question I'd like to ask Mr. Travis, if he would come up. And just identify yourself quickly.
I'm Tom Travis.
Yeah, and you mentioned like 3 areas that you felt that were still inadequate, several different areas. And I just, whether it's, not necessarily taking a lot of time right now, but sort of what would make those areas adequate? In other words, where as you all are looking from the community perspective, what are the, how would we get from inadequate to adequate? And I feel like Director is receptive and listening to you all at the community meetings. Anyway.
I think it would be very important to make it clear right now that the emergency response plan is a problem with PGV that has a long history, and that Darryl has been Civil Defense Director for a certain period of time. And I don't think many from the community, since I come from Lower Puna, I won't say anyone, but I don't think many from the community would be at all critical and anything but supportive and grateful to the effort that Darryl has done, and that includes with PGV. However, the underlying structure is that there was a permit. To get the original permit, PGV was required to come up with an approved set of emergency response plans for various issues. On top of that, county has emergency operating conditions. They have a document that guides Darryl that tells him what his emergency operating conditions are. The third document that needs to be understood is that there's a trifold for how to deal with PGV.
Excuse me one fast.
Excuse me.
It's a chair.
You know what?
It's a chair.
I think we're getting a little bit off subject here, so I'd like to stay within the scope of the communication. And that was for the discussion of the emergency response, and with the Director of Civil Defense to coordinate with Island-wide Community Emergency Response Team Network. I think we're going into a little bit too broad, and I appreciate
Thank you, Mr.
it.
Chair.
But I'm going to have to please summarize.
Can we have him summarize
Please.
first? Because I meant for this to be a discussion on these, on community issues.
Mr. Chair, point of information or point of order.
Point of order.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Onishi.
What the communication reads is just an update basically from Civil Defense and Public Works
No.
for about the lava flow.
No.
Then it's about the CERT team. Okay.
Correct.
But there's like nothing about like permitting and so forth and what the plans of this emergency for PGV. Okay, because we're talking about the lava flow.
Right.
So if we can keep it on that topic, that would be great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Can you go ahead and summarize?
Yes, I can. The PGV emergency response plan, which was developed.
Yeah, Michael.
The PGV emergency response plan, which was developed originally with community involvement, at least the one that I can get my hands on, still allows the plan to operate.
Mr. Travis, please. I don't want to go into too much about PGV and.
Mr. Paleka, we lived there. PGV, when the hurricane happened, the rest of you
I
had
understand.
wind. We had gas. Civil
Yes.
defense is
Mr.
required
Travis,
to deal. Civil defense is
Mr.
required
Travis,
to
please
deal.
come to order. Please come to order. The communication has a scope of discussion which includes the update of the flow status from the Director of Civil Defense to coordinate with Island-wide community emergency response efforts. Now, I appreciate your concerns. They were brought up in the discussions and public testimony. Now, we can ask the questions of the director, but I'm not going to have you here voicing out concerns again without having the director being able to respond. I think it's only fair to the director and to the rest of the members of the council to keep this in order. And please summarize. If there's a couple of points you would like to bring up questions from Mr. Oliveira, by all means, please do so. Thank you.
I think there needs to be a formal lessons learned review of how the emergency response failed for Tropical Storm Iselle. And I think that the emergency response plans, both the emergency operating conditions of the county, the trifold, and PGV's emergency response plans need to be reworked based on the initial conditions changing with the lava flow. I think that needs to be formal. I know that Darryl is doing that day to day, working PGV, and I appreciate it, and I thank him for that, but I think there needs to be a formal review. I think the county needs to take it upon their shoulders to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Travis.
Yeah, I just want to, I did.
Just a minute, Ms. Willie. Mr. Oliveira, if you could respond to those two concerns that he had brought up.
No, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, we have learned lessons with the various incidents that have occurred with PGV and the releases, and we have identified gaps and ways to make improvements. Again, we look forward to working with the community because, as Mr. Travis points out, it's in their backyard. They live with it. They're exposed to it. And again, we have an obligation to make sure we keep our community safe. And obviously, we would like to improve the tools that we use, not just for myself as the current administrator, but for the future administrators of civil defense, a tool that will be effective in them managing the events that occur and keeping the community safe.
Thank you. And in regards to the emergency response plan,
Right, as was mentioned, there was a response plan that was submitted to the county, but there are issues or concerns whether it's complete or needs to include or be modified based on current conditions. As I shared early on, is we requested some consideration be given to some of the changes in technology, improvements in I want to say one example, improvements in how you would assess the meteorological conditions as well as how H2S or hydrogen sulfide disperses in the community. It used to be thought that it would just disperse as a nice blanket cloud, but as we've seen with some of the events that we've had or incident we've had, as well as lessons learned with other chemicals such as sulfur dioxide, we can have pockets or puffs of this product so that you could have readings showing no threat, no impact, and just a few feet away have readings that would exceed quantities or concentrations that would pose potential health risks. So we need to do a better job in assessing the impact of the release, and that's what we're looking to do.
I guess I might have one question regarding the lava flow and release of sulfide gas. Have we have any occurrences today?
With the current eruption and lava flow, there's no gaseous byproducts down, if you want to call it downslope. The sulfur dioxide that's released at the source at both Halemaumau and Pono. Since 2008, we've seen a consistent reduction in the concentrations that we no longer see the high levels of sulfur dioxide that we saw back then. So as it relates to the actual lava flow, there is no hazards associated with any off-gassing of the lava flow.
Thank you.